Said earlier, this is an edited interview of Liz. She and I met for probably about 4 hours, and I edited her story to maintain her voice. Most of my life, I told myself it was no big deal. This happens to a lot of children. You read about it in the paper all the time. It wasn't like I knew that I had damage and that I needed help. When you're 12 years old, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking how to survive. I knew nothing about living or really being joyful. The first time he raped me, I had been playing in the park at lunchtime. He called me back into the school. He had big books on his desk, a bottle of sherry and shot glasses. That was the first time I ever tasted alcohol. I could see myself doing all these things, having the drink, and him taking my underwear off and sitting me on top of him and raping me, and that hurting and how nasty and mean and ugly and scary he was. I remember being silent, no yelling, no crying. My first thought was, now how can I be a nun? They don't have sex, especially with their teacher. How could I be something that was holy and good when I was so bad? Mertzbacher was my homeroom teacher at Catholic Community Middle School in South Baltimore, the first person I saw every morning. He never taught anything. He gave grades based on who he was abusing. He always directed the school plays, religious plays, and made sure that the part of Jesus went to the kid he was having sex with. He was king of that school. We were hostages, prisoners of war, locked in under his spell. Here's this person calling boys faggots, smacking kids, grabbing boys on the behinds in the hallway, calling girls rotten crotches in front of teachers, nuns, and they did nothing. We witnessed one another's abuse, but we never discussed it outside of there when maybe it would have been safe. On the street after school, I saw the same boys who were called into the back room to have sex with me. Nobody said, "Do you see how crazy he is? What about him firing the gun?" There was this unspoken humiliation among his victims. We said nothing. Mertzbacher reinforced our silence by threatening, "If you ever tell, no matter how old you are, I will kill you and your entire family." Practically every day at school, he held a gun right up to my head, playing Russian roulette, pulling the trigger. There was no doubt that he would do it. I knew the gun was loaded. He did this to lots of students. The message that sent was incomprehensible then. It still is. And it happened all 3 years of middle school. By the time I was 14, I had an alcohol and drug problem. I was stealing Valium from my mother. My freshman year in high school, I was smoking PCP before school and doing anything else I could get my hands on. I just knew I had to survive the best way I knew how, and for me, that was getting high and having a chip on my shoulder, not letting anybody close. 30 years ago, you were a good kid or a bad kid. They didn't realize you were in pain. Nobody said, "There's a reason why a child acts this way. There's something behind this anger." I didn't come from a broken home. My father was a policeman. My mother was a devout Catholic. They weren't alcoholic. My behavior had radically changed. I acted like an animal. After Mertzbacher, I wasn't afraid of anybody. I was probably afraid of everything. By the time I was in my third high school, I was kicked out of one of them. I didn't want to make friends or do anything but go to school and graduate. Now I was innocent looking. What I couldn't change on the inside, I could change on the outside. Even after my worst drunk or sleeping in Federal Hill Park, I found somewhere to take a shower and put on that Catholic schoolgirl uniform, and there wasn't one wrinkle. It's as if I lived in two worlds. What everybody saw was this kid who looked innocent, who had a sense of humor. Who would suspect this little kid with the white saddle shoes of having an ounce of coke? My family didn't know I was an alcoholic. They never saw me drunk. I always had to maintain this public image. When I marched into life at the age of majority, I was just trying to survive from one disaster to another. I tried so hard to just be okay. It took me almost 20 years to realize that there would be no way to be okay. Years later, after I moved back to Baltimore, I was at a funeral in my old neighborhood. This priest, who had been a student in my middle school, started talking to me. That Merzbacher sure was weird. I told him about some of the stuff he did to me. The priest asked if I would contact some of the other people who were in Merzbacher's classes. I really prayed about it. I knew this could be very, very unforgiving. What do I tell him to do 20 years after it happened? But I picked up the phone book and figured, well, why not call this one girl first? She wasn't even in my class. She was younger than me, but I had a feeling. There are certain looks, you just kind of have this sixth sense. I called, "Look, Laura, you know John Merzbacher?" The girl immediately broke down in tears. We both started calling other people we went to school with. All that networking broke it open. Right away, I was bonded with the other people. I hadn't been friends with them, hadn't really known them but a few weeks. I was unable to express the real pain that I was suffering. But I could see their pain, the humiliation on people's faces, and the uncontrollable crying and fear. These people held up a mirror to me, really put me in touch with my inner feelings. I was able to look at their suffering and how it affected their lives, and still be able to love and forgive them. So if I could do that for them, how could I not do it for myself? I don't think I could have ever sat down and consciously said, I'm worth being compassionate to, I'm worth forgiving. The group of students discovered that they could bring up a criminal case against Merzbacher and possibly get him in jail, in prison. Liz's case was the first one, and she became a spokesperson for the group. She was interviewed on television and in the newspaper. I was so afraid when I testified, but I noticed that he wouldn't look at me. The more he would look down, the more I had to make a point of addressing everything to him. The whole time I was sitting there, I was very conscious of the other victims sitting in the hallway. I was doing this for all of us. My legs were shaking and the judge kept telling me to speak up. All I wanted to do was to be able to speak without shaking. The prosecutor said it would be okay to cry. I was determined not to. She told me to dress as young as possible, but I was the furthest thing away from being young. I felt like a very old person psychologically. Pretend to be weak. She wanted them to feel sorry for me. I didn't want the jury's pity. This was the story. I wanted to tell it. This is what he did. Either you believe it or you don't believe it, but I'm not going to kiss anybody's ass. I got upset when I looked out and saw people cry. Stop it, get a grip, stop crying over me. He got 4 life sentences plus 10 years. They didn't bother trying any of the other cases. Getting him in prison was only half the battle. What about the people who enabled him to get away with it, either by ignorance or by looking the other way? Those people need to be held accountable too. We decided to sue the church. The attorney for the civil case had a 12-year-old daughter who died of cancer. The funeral was at the Cathedral of Mary, our Queen. Sister Eileen, the principal at my middle school, was principal there now. I knew she was going to be there, and my heart was just pounding. I cried a lot through that funeral, not only because it was a sad occasion, it was as if I was crying for all of these kids. Here she was, principal of all these middle school-aged children, marching them all in and sitting them in their little pews, just like when she was my principal. I thought, you know, you buried a lot of children. That's me up in that coffin. How many children died in my school spiritually and psychologically? She presided over that. I made it a point to cross over into her communion line because she was avoiding eye contact with me. I wanted to look her in the eye while she handed me the Eucharist and said, Body of Christ. It's such a powerful sacrament. Part of me wanted her to make the connection between that sacrament and me. She couldn't look at me. Another time, a friend of mine made confirmation, and I wanted to be there for her. The bishop was talking about the 8th graders being witnesses to the gospel. This was the same bishop that confirmed me. I went up, took his hand, and I wouldn't let go of it. You know, Bishop Newman, it's nice to meet you. My name is Elizabeth Murphy. And his eyes went boing. I heard what you told the children. What you failed to tell the children was how difficult it would be once they reached that mountaintop and witnessed the gospel truth, that they can be betrayed by evil going on in the church. You need to tell them that. Well, he's trying to back away, and I'm holding onto his hand, squeezing it. I wouldn't let go. 20 years ago, you confirmed a young man from the Catholic Community Middle School, and he was immediately sodomized by a man in that ceremony, in that very church. Remember that, Bishop. Your silence does not help us. His face was as red as his bishop's hat. My life is not pretty on paper. Why I'm not a sinner and a self-centered son of a bitch is a mystery to me. I think my life gives witness to the power of God. Throughout all of this, my faith in God was never shaken. Exposing this, telling everybody, was never something that I was consciously seeking to do. But I see nothing wrong with the church being brought to its knees and, in a sense, purified through these things being made public. Maybe it's an opportunity for redemption. The victims were not able to pursue the case against the church because of the statute of limitations. In Maryland, a victim has to do that before the age of 25. Thank you.